Welcome. So here we're going to look at curriculum and curriculum theory, and we will be analysing this idea of what a knowledge-rich curriculum actually is, and how important is it, and how realistic is it. So where does this term knowledge-rich come from then? It's become really popular recently over the last few years. Do schools really know what it is? What does knowledge rich actually mean? Knowledge rich seems to originate from the changes made in education policy by the coalition and then Conservative government's education minister Michael Gove on the left and their schools minister Nick Gibb on the right, who both came into office convinced that pupils didn't know enough and wanted them to have more knowledge and wanted them to become what we might call knowledge rich. Both Gove and Gibb were highly critical of New Labour's education reforms, which they felt focused far too much on practical skills and not enough on knowledge. They were highly influenced by an American educational thinker called E.D. Hirsch Jr., who you can see here on the left. Now, Hirsch wrote a book in 1987 called Cultural Literacy, and it provided what some believed to be a really convincing theory, which stated that children need a foundation of core knowledge to be able to learn and access the curriculum and society. He argued that knowledge was a little bit like a Velcro. What he meant by that was that knowledge is sticky, and if you have some of it and you learn some more, new knowledge sticks to old knowledge. Many people were convinced by this theory. Hirsch's theory is based on reading theory, and it sounds really convincing. So if you're teaching children to read and they come across new words that they haven't read before, they will make more sense of these words if they have everyday experience of the particular new word they're reading. So if they encounter the word church for the first time, they'll be able to make sense of it if they actually know what a church is, if what it looks like if they've visited one. The same goes for other words like, say, I don't know, museum, or maybe in history, Viking. It does sound convincing, and when it comes to reading, I think it is pretty convincing. And actually, if you want to know more about Hirsch's theory, I highly recommend you read chapter 2 of his book, Cultural Literacy. Gove and Gibb were convinced that pupils lacked core knowledge and that the school curriculum lacked core knowledge, and they felt this was key to future success. Perhaps they wanted education to be like their education was in the past. Anyway, what they did is they reformed education policy and they made sweeping changes to the curriculum. They changed every single key stage, including A-level, from the age of 5 up to 18. And the curriculum focused much more on knowledge and in history on content. And this content shines through GCSE and A-level specifications. So that's probably why when it comes to GCSE and A-level teaching, there's just so much knowledge for teachers to get through. This has led to more didactic methods of teaching being used in many schools. You know, retrieval quizzes at the beginning of lessons, etc. But going back to this idea of core knowledge. Now, the problem with Hirsch, Gove and Gibb's conception of knowledge is that it's actually incomplete. They are viewing knowledge as content, or what we might call substantive knowledge. And actually, the theory works well here if we just focus on substantive knowledge, because if we're teaching history as a way of just remembering one story, remembering the facts of the story, then it's important that we can learn and retain this information. But actually, Hirsch, Gove and Gibb's conception of knowledge seems to really fall down when we realise that in a subject like history, it's not just made up of substantive knowledge, it's also made up of what we call disciplinary knowledge. So what do we do in history? As well as acquiring a story or many different stories, we get students to answer causal questions. We look at consequences. We consider how change happens over different periods of time, how quickly and maybe how slowly. We might think, how did change affect people? Did it affect everyone? Did it only affect a few people? We also consider how history has been constructed and why there are different versions of the past. Now, these second order concepts, or disciplinary knowledge, if that's what we want to call it, it's much more slippery than just remembering a story. There's more depth of analysis is needed when teaching and thinking about it. Therefore, different teaching approaches are needed, not just rote learning and remembering. Alongside E.D. Hirsch Jr., Michael Young has been a massive influence on the big focus on curriculum and the re-emergence of traditional school subjects since around about 2010. He has written many articles on the subject of powerful knowledge and authored a number of important books on the subjects of knowledge and the curriculum. The first book that, well, at least to my mind, the first book that he wrote about this was called Bringing Knowledge Back In. And this quote really kind of sums up his thinking. Here he says, "What is it about the kind of knowledge that people can acquire at school, college or university that distinguishes it from the knowledge that people acquire in their everyday lives, at work and in their families?" And actually, this is what Young's argument is all about. He argues that children gain knowledge in school that they cannot get at home in their everyday lives. And they gain this knowledge from school subject disciplines. So, in his book, Knowledge and the Future School, he went even further. What he did is he distinguished between three models of the curriculum in terms of their assumptions about knowledge. And he referred in this book to three forms of curriculum: Future 1, Future 2, and Future 3. And Future 3 is where we can find this idea of powerful knowledge for all pupils as a curriculum principle for any school. And to my mind, alongside E.D. Hirsch Jr., Michael Young has helped influence a paradigm shift in national education policy since 2010. So before 2010, the overall aim of New Labour's curricula was one of, I suppose, economic utility. So the point of going to school was to get a job, to make money, to be productive for the economy. Okay? Whereas the aim of the Gove curriculum was to provide pupils with essential knowledge, which formed a kind of social entitlement. So I suppose Young's argument, and perhaps Gove's argument as well, is if kids harness knowledge and gain knowledge, social mobility will happen for those pupils who do gain knowledge, and they will be socially mobile because they'll pass exams and they'll get to go to university, and potentially with a degree they will become richer and more enlightened. So Young and Co.'s notion of powerful knowledge is what we're going to discuss here. And what you are going to do is you are going to listen to a podcast or read an article, and then you're going to read a critique of Young, and you're going to answer some questions on our discussion forum. And I think that this is pretty damn relevant at the moment, bearing in mind the Conservatives are no longer in power and Labour will be thinking about curriculum reform, and I wonder where they're going to go with their notion of kind of curricula and knowledge. So yeah, as I said, you're going to listen to a podcast or read an article by Young. You're going to read Claxton's thoughts on Young, and you're going to discuss this virtually with the other student teachers on our brilliant history course. Have fun.